Welcome to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast, a place where backcountry warriors can share their stories of grit, service, healing, and wilderness adventures. I'm your host, Tom Walton, Marine Corps veteran, full-time cop, and aspiring hunting and fishing guide. Join me and others as we journey from the hood to the woods in pursuit of freedom in the outdoors. Thank you for joining me on the very first episode of the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast. I couldn't be any more excited to start this journey with you. Since it's the first episode, I figured I would introduce myself by sharing a couple of stories about some hard-earned first. My first arrest as a solo officer on patrol, and my first successful hunt, during which I took a beautiful bear with my bow. But before we get started, I want to give you a little background on myself. You'll get to know me better over the course of this journey, so stick with me. I grew up on the central coast of California where I rode horses, spent time in the woods with my buddies, and went fishing and camping with my dad and grandparents. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old and did 5 years on active duty in the security forces and the infantry. Now, some of the infantry Marines out there probably just gave up on me already because they heard security forces, but please guys, stick with me. I'm sorry, but it is just part of my story and it was an important part. Anyways, after the Marines, my wife and I stayed in California where I got hired as a sheriff's deputy in Riverside County in 2013. Since being in law enforcement, I have done corrections, patrol, and several other assignments. I am currently a detective, and I've been on SWAT for a combined 8 years. 8 years ago, my wife and I decided to leave California and move to Idaho, where I immediately fell in love with hunting and fishing. While I'm still a full-time cop, I have aspirations of also being a hunting and fishing guide in both Alaska and Idaho. I've already guided a few hunts in Idaho to include deer, mountain lion, and bear. I've also done a few fishing trips. On this podcast, I'm going to share the adventure with you, and along the way, we're going to talk to some incredible people. So stay tuned, and without further ado, let the adventure begin. When I started policing 13 years ago, the guys around me, at least most of them, loved the job. They set high standards and had higher expectations, but they also had a lot of fun. And one of the best parts back then, especially as a young sheriff's deputy in Southern California, was what we called the hunt. It simply meant going out and proactively looking for bad guys doing bad things, building cases from scratch. Whether it was a simple dope arrest or catching a burglar in the act, there was a sense of pride in it. It was the game and the chase. I love being out in the dark streets at 2 a.m., just the cops and the bad guys. Now I'll admit, like any new guy with something to prove, my ego was a little involved. I wanted to prove myself to my partners. I wanted to show that I had what it takes to be a good cop. But at the core, the mission was always clear. It was to protect and serve the community and take criminals off the street so people can enjoy peace. I'd just gotten off field training, 2 weeks on my own after 4 months of every move being graded by a field training officer. And now it was just me on night shift, patrolling a quiet rural beat in the middle of the Southern California desert. I was hungry to make my first real arrest as a solo cop, and I stopped absolutely everything that moved, hoping for a little luck. Unfortunately, I didn't have any instincts yet, and I kept coming up empty. Some folks probably felt a little bit harassed by the rookie Deputy Walton, and to them, I apologize. But here's the thing. You can't tell weird from normal if you don't first learn what normal looks like. After those first 2 weeks of turning up nothing, I did start to lose my confidence a little bit, but I'm pretty dang stubborn, and I wasn't giving up. Then, late one night, everything changed. I was driving my Crown Vic down a dark county road flanked by cotton fields. My headlights cut through the dark night and lit up 2 people walking down the middle of the road. And while that's already a little bit odd, it's not what made this a little bit extra weird. These 2 were tied together at the waist by a rope. Not kidding you, it looked like they were navigating a blizzard and trying not to lose each other. This guy was wearing a long black trench coat and had tan shorts, and he was pushing a shopping cart full of junk. I thought to myself, all right, this actually might be a little bit interesting. I mean, a high school criminal justice student could probably pick this one out as suspicious. So I pulled up, flipped on the red and blues, and stepped out. I started chatting with these 2 night owls. The guy was fidgety, twitchy, and wouldn't make eye contact with me. His arm was glued to his side as if he was hiding something precious. On top of that, anybody probably could have noticed this guy was high, likely on meth. And while I didn't know exactly what I was looking at, I knew it wasn't good. So I asked the woman to untie herself from her companion, and she did, also nervous. I had the guy face away from me so that I could do a pat down. I gripped his dry, dirty fingers with my left hand and started searching with my right. And that's when I felt it. A pistol inside his jacket. We both froze, knowing that this interaction just got really serious. I didn't say a word. I just got my cuffs on him as fast as I could and secured his weapon. He immediately started apologizing and admitted his status as a convicted felon on probation. I ended up finding a loaded gun and a baggie of crystal meth in his jacket. In California, at least back then, that was 3 charges right there. He was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm, possession of methamphetamine, a controlled substance, and being under the influence while armed. He was absolutely under arrest, and I had done it. Now, this wasn't the most dramatic thing that I'd ever do in my career, but it was my first solo arrest and a milestone, and I was proud when I walked this guy into the jail. The staff laughing, "Look what the rookie just dragged in." And even though this guy wasn't exactly hostile, or maybe even evil, it sure felt good to take an armed felon high on meth off the streets, even if it was just for a little while. It was a small victory, and the beginning of a long and meaningful journey. And let me tell you, my career hasn't slowed down since. All right, now I want to fast forward to my first successful hunt. The cold rain had finally stopped, and the sun started to warm my chilled body. I'd been sitting in the tree stand for hours, soaked and shivering, completely unprepared for the sudden downpour on what was supposed to be a warm, sunny June day. The only visitors that I'd had so far were some squirrels raiding the barrel below, overflowing with dog food and maple syrup. I was on a spring bear hunt in Idaho. I'd only started hunting a few months ago during the fall season and couldn't manage to seal the deal. I'd chased elk and deer for weeks. Nothing. Even turkeys gave me the slip. So there I was, frozen and discouraged, bow in hand and questioning my life choices. Earlier that day, my buddy had dropped me off about a quarter mile from the stand. "You remember where it is?" he asked, as I climbed off his four-wheeler. "Yep," I said, trying to sound a little bit more confident than I felt. He had been mentoring me a lot that year, providing me some much-needed inspiration and motivation. A few months ago, he'd asked me if I was interested in trying to hunt for some bears. I'd never really thought about hunting bears and asked him, "Can you even eat a bear?" "Hell yeah," he said, "they're delicious." He gave me a sample of some bear sausage, and it was amazing. I was absolutely sold. He set just one condition, though, before we headed out for our hunt. I had to use a bow. So I decided to take him up on it, and I bought a used bow, from him, of course, the good salesman that he was, and we spent months practicing, and I started to feel confident in my abilities. Eventually, we had a few big bears showing up on the trail camera, and the day finally came where I had to head to the tree stand. I was stoked. But, based on my previous hunting attempts, I wasn't holding my breath to find success. As the low rumble of his four-wheeler faded into the distance, I stood alone on the trail, bow in hand, pistol on my hip. I remember thinking to myself, what the heck am I doing? I'm about to walk into a bear's dining room with nothing but a bow and arrow. It seemed absolutely crazy. Well, screw it. Let's do this, I thought, and took a deep breath to calm myself. I started hiking. All was quiet when I arrived. I climbed up the ladder and settled in and took in the view. I was high on a western slope of a mountain and far below a valley stretched for miles. I waited and waited and waited. And suddenly dark clouds appeared and swallowed the sun, and a cold wind picked up with pelting rain. My cheap rain gear quickly failed, and I was downright miserable. I badly wanted to get out of that tree, swaying in the wind from side to side, but I couldn't face my buddy if I did. So determined, again my ego involved, I stayed. Finally the clouds parted. Slightly warmed by the setting sun, I started to doze off when the bushes behind the barrel exploded. That's no squirrel, I thought. I snapped to attention when a reddish-brown bear stepped out, standing tall on its hind legs, nose twitching as it sniffed the air. The sunlight hit its wet fur, making it glow like something out of a dream. I'd had no experience with bears, and at that point, that thing might as well have been a 10-foot grizzly bear. I was in absolute awe of the creature that stood before me, and I was a little bit scared. The bear dropped to all fours and shook like a wet dog, sending water droplets into the sunlight, surrounding it in a golden mist. Suddenly, the bear turned and disappeared. I was thrilled and crushed. I had thought I missed my chance. Then the cold rain and wind started again, and when it stopped a few minutes later, the bear briefly appeared like a ghost on the trail to my left, before walking off without a sound. I didn't know what to make of it, but I figured I'd missed my chance again. Then the rain started again and stopped about 10 minutes later, and again the bear appeared, this time to my right. Now it was starting to get a little bit eerie, as this bear had just circled me and I never heard or saw a thing, and the bear walked off just as silently as it had appeared. I hardly had time to contemplate the situation when the bear busted out of the brush, this time headed right for the barrel and dinner. The Bruin stopped and sniffed the ground, broadside, just 8 yards in front of me. It's now or never, I thought. I slowly raised my bow and drew back. My sight pin settled on brown fur, and I hit the release. Thwack! The arrow struck home. The bear let out a roar and bit at the impact site. Then it took off running, crashing through the brush behind me and out of sight. It got quiet, like real quiet. I was shaking with adrenaline. I looked down and saw my bloody arrow laying on the ground where the bear had once stood. That's a good sign, I thought. Excited, I called my buddy. Hey, bro, I just shot a bear. Calmly, he responded, Roger that. I'll be up in a bit, and hung up. In a bit, I thought. I'm sitting in a tree with this wounded bear nearby and a pistol that suddenly feels like a BB gun. I wanted backup now. I tried to wait, but I couldn't take it, and I had to know what happened. So I took a few minutes to calm myself before climbing down. Last thing I needed to do was try to climb down in a hurry and hurt myself. And once my feet were on firm ground, I followed the blood trail with caution. I didn't have to go far. About 30 yards into the brush, I found my bear. I threw a few sticks at it, ready for a charge. It didn't move. It was over. I was flooded with a strange cocktail of emotions: triumph, sadness, and gratitude. The bear turned out to be a big, beautiful 18-year-old sow, and she had probably lived a long life, likely the queen of her mountain. I was in disbelief. After so much effort and countless failures, I finally found success. It was the beginning of a life-changing journey. The sound of my buddy pulling up on his four-wheeler broke the silence. He hopped off and walked over. That's a fine bear, he said. He coached me through the field dressing process, and by the time I got done, I looked like an axe murderer, my arms and face bloody. We loaded the bear on his four-wheeler and headed down to my truck. I thanked my buddy for all of his efforts. I was eternally grateful, and he had no idea what he'd done for me. And while this ends the story of the hunt, the story of my evening doesn't end there. I was driving the back roads on my way home, bear in the bed of my truck. I might have rolled a few stop signs, too excited to notice or care. Of course, red and blue lights in the rear view. I pulled over and a young blonde woman dressed in a tidy Idaho State Police uniform approached my window. I explained the situation and my excitement. I saw her eyes drift to the pistol on my hip, and I reassured her that I was also a cop and on the same team. She responded professionally and took my info back to her car. I thought for sure I was going to get a ticket. Eventually, she came back and said, I'm not going to write you a ticket, just slow down and drive safe. I thanked her, and as she turned to leave, she stopped. I do have one question before you go. Is that a small bear? I laughed. Listen, lady, that is not a question you ask a man when you first meet him. Second of all, I'll have you know that is a very average-sized bear. She laughed and walked off, let me go without a ticket. Finally, back at the house, I was up till 3 a.m. skinning and butchering, figuring out as I went. And a few days later, as my wife and I sat down to eat our first bear dinner, I knew it wouldn't be our last wild meal. The adventure had just begun. Well, folks, that puts a wrap on a podcast of first. Thanks for listening to the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast, and I want to leave you with just a few closing thoughts. Doing things for the first time, whether it's in your professional life or in the backcountry, takes a certain amount of grit and courage. Failure is not only a possibility, it's inevitable, but failure is where we learn. I've failed multiple times before hooking my first bad guy and bagging my first bear. And let me tell you, starting this podcast is both intimidating and exciting. and I will likely stumble. But that will only make me better, and I hope you will stick with me on this journey. Folks, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to the first episode of the Pursuing Freedom Outdoors podcast. On upcoming episodes, I will be joined by some incredible guests with some incredible stories to share. So, stay tuned. You won't want to miss it. Thanks again, and if this resonates with you, I want to welcome you to the tribe and encourage you to share this podcast with your friends. Hit subscribe and follow us on Instagram at Pursuing Freedom Outdoors. And if you or someone you know has a great story about life or the wilderness, I want to share it. You can shoot me a message on Instagram or email me with all inquiries and questions at thomas@pursuingfreedomoutdoors.com. That's Thomas, Thomas, at pursuingfreedomoutdoors.com. Until next time, get out there, get after it, and pursue freedom in the outdoors.